Welcome back to Demystifying Self-Publishing, a podcast where we dive into the stories behind the storytellers. Today's guest is Kay Sparling, author of Mission Thaw, a high-stakes Cold War-era thriller featuring espionage, opera, and a race against time to dismantle a human trafficking cartel. With a fearless heroine, rich historical detail, and page-turning suspense, Kaye blends fact and fiction in a way that keeps you hooked. We're talking about her inspiration for the book, how she tackled complex political themes, and what it's really like bringing a story like this to life through self-publishing. Welcome to the podcast, Kaye.
Thank you for having me.
I love this specific genre. I personally really gravitate towards it. I'm on a mission to read one book per week this year, and a lot of them seem to be within this thriller espionage kind of realm.
Cool.
So I'm excited to chat with you.
That's always good to hear because so many female, I've done a lot of podcasting now with female authors, and they seem to be never in my genre, but by the end they're like, hey, I'm going to read that. And that'll be my first espionage book I've ever read. And I'm like, cool. So I'm glad to hear that you're really going at it.
Absolutely. Yes. I really like historical fiction as well. And so this kind of blends both of those realms.
Absolutely.
So I'm eager to chat about that.
Yeah. Most of this book is true facts. I just change the names and the places sometimes to protect people. So you're learning absolute history when you read my book.
Amazing. Well, let's dive into that then, because the premise, we're near the end of the Cold War, an opera singer becomes a CIA operative. It is very unique. What sparked the idea for the story?
I am an opera singer. And when you think about an opera singer being a spy, people, especially the publishing industry, went, oh, that's too far-fetched. But actually, it does happen. And actually, it's perfect. It's a perfect cover. They have to travel internationally. They go from place to place if they're big stars. They know probably 4 languages. Okay? And they were able to step into the highest echelons of society, where most of the stuff is going on that the CIA wants to know. So they just blend right in, no matter where they're at, and with their language abilities and their memory abilities. You have to remember, opera singers memorize 3 to 4 hour operas in a foreign language. So they have incredible memory. So they have great oral recall. Meaning they can go through a whole big cocktail party for 2 hours, and then they can come back to headquarters and pretty much type up their report. Opera singers are probably the highest profile type of spies there are, and they're usually just information gatherers. But in this mission, this is, at the end of the Cold War, late 80s, Caitlin Stewart is the only woman in this entire mission of the CIA team and the MI6 team from UK. So she is a glass ceiling breaker, okay? And she's a great information gatherer. I mean, she can schmooze. She can act like she sympathizes with neo-Nazis or KGB, whatever she needs to do. Of course, she's young and she's beautiful. And so all these men kind of put their guards down, And so she's great at that. But unfortunately, the way that the plot keeps twisting and twisting in this mission, she has to become much more of a combat agent. And, she's not really prepared for that. So she is absolutely learning as she goes. And she's a real wisecracker, And, her wit kind of gets both teams through this terrible ordeal, because it is pretty terrible what they do find out. And then they have to try to stop it. And the way they can stop it, can't go in and just mow down one human trafficking auction. You have to gather the information and proof, and then you can take it to NATO, CIA, MI6, Geneva Convention, etc. So that's how they have to do things. This book is very, very important because this mission actually helped bring down the Berlin Wall, which was a huge thing because USSR was not doing well. And they were letting go all those countries they had first taken over after World War II. Poland, Czechoslovakia, Romania, all these countries. And GDR, the East Germans, they were communist and they were really, USSR's back pocket. In fact, during this mission, a lot of KGB are in East Germany. So they're definitely working together. And so basically the premise of their thoughts were, all right, so, we've got all these refugees. We left them with no infrastructure. Like Hungary, even in Budapest, you were lucky if you had running water or electricity on any given day.
Right.
And the Russian mafia ran into all those countries, and it was basically anarchy. People did not have food to eat. They had no jobs because the jobs were, they might have been working in a tank factory. And I was in one city, Bratislava, that the entire city pretty much made tanks. And when they left, you just saw all these buildings just on and on and on, these factories that were just sitting there. So no one had any jobs, And so
Right.
what are these people going to do? What would you do if you had a family or even for yourself? Well, you're going to pack up what you can and you're going to, if you have to, walk to the nearest Western European country. For a lot of these people, that was Austria. And so the Austrians did not want them. At the time, a prime minister had ran on the neo-Nazi ticket, Kurt Waldheim, and won. Now, do you think a small country like Austria that has that kind of prime minister is going to want a bunch of poor refugees? So I was living in Vienna at the time. I was an apprentice at the Vienna State Opera. And I literally was seeing these people just pour into Vienna. And I also sang at churches, because apprenticeships don't pay much. And so, I had worked for the diocese in New York City. So they said, hey, if you ever want to work, and do some important singing, in the cathedrals. So sometimes I do that. And I got to know a lot of priests. And the Catholic Social Services on the edge of town had set up a huge refugee camp. And so they asked me, well, would you like to be a volunteer and try to, give them some kind of respite by bringing some entertainment? And could you please try to raise money? Because you're in this high society, all the opera aficionados, they're very rich, and so, maybe you can get some of the more liberal ones to give money, whatever you can do, and that's how it started. And so I go to the camp and I just see the conditions and it's heartbreaking. And they'd sit there day after day, nothing to do. Kids don't really have toys to play with. It's really devastatingly depressing. Okay. And so what happens is they're sitting there for days, and then these undercover Western dirty businessmen or even undercover KGB come on in to the camp and say, hey, yeah, I know you were Czechoslovakian and USSR let you down, but, the GDR's doing great. So, pack up your stuff and, come with us and we'll give you jobs and we'll give you housing and medical care and, education for your kids. You would have thought these poor people would question that after what USSR, living under their regime and then seeing what happened when they were let go. But, when you're desperate, things are different, right? And sometimes there's a language barrier and all kinds of stuff. Okay? And so they would sign up and they'd get on these trains in the middle of the night and they would go somewhere in between Austria and East Germany. And they'd stop at these little alpine villages where, nobody's up and there, maybe there's 30 people living there, but there's a train station. Okay, so in these itty-bitty train stations, they would basically have slave auctions. And what would happen is they'd send the children and the old people and anybody that maybe had like, a bad leg or something, someone that couldn't work in a work camp, they will send back to the refugees. So they go back west. So they're splitting children from their, parents and grandparents. And then the able working men all got auctioned off to these different work camps, factories, etc. And then the women that were beautiful, and I'm talking all the way females down to like 11 years old, would be put in another section on the East train because they were going to go to either individual men who bought them for sex, or they would go to East Berlin underground brothels, these men's clubs. And there were horrible things that happened in those clubs. And so these auctions were devastating. And these people, of course, they'd have a lot of armed guards. So there was no way they were going to escape one of those situations. And a lot of times it was in the winter, and we're in the Alpine region where how many feet of snow do they get? So they would have frozen to death if they tried, because these places would be very remote. So that's how East Germany was staying afloat economically, is that they were getting all this free labor. And once the people got there, it was much like the World War II concentration camps. If you tried to escape, you were shot. And, really bad conditions. Right. And then when they get weak and die, well, let's just get some more. Same kind of thing. And so the idea for Mission Thaw was, well, if you can get this to stop, then they're going to go down. So basically, if you can shut down this free labor thing where they don't take care of people and they just use them, then you're going to shut down the GDR, and that Berlin Wall will come down. So it starts a year and a half, and it ends about 6 months before the wall came down in 1989. So that's what this whole thing is. And Caitlin just keeps getting more involved and more involved, And one cool thing is that, all the people she gets to train with. And one person that is her main trainer, who at the beginning completely kiboshes the idea of using her. The idea of using this opera singer, American opera singer, young woman, he basically tells her in a meeting the first time everyone meets him, go take your ball gowns and go home because, you're not made for this mission. By then she's been recruited by the CI and she's been training for a year. And, right away in that meeting, he's trying to figure out a way, because this main antagonist, Western business person, Herr Leitner, he always has the KGB and the neo-Nazis to his castle in the outside of Vienna. That's where they plan these things. So the big deal is to get somebody to get invited to that castle, and then they can plant bugs everywhere, okay? And that was the idea. And so, they're having a hard time doing that because Leitner's really smart, and he only brings his own home staff there with him. So it's not like you could get a guy, that's really combat trained to get hired as a waiter or something. It's not going to work, okay? And so it has to be a guest, someone that they want to join their party. Well, who's better than this opera singer? Because Leitner is so into opera, and particularly Mozart. And he's looking for the prima donna to be the new absolute star, and Austria can claim them. And he pretty much keeps the Vienna State Opera afloat. So he's looking for his person. And so Caitlin can just walk in, sing once. He just falls in love with her voice and her, and completely wants to mentor her. And so,
immediately lets his guard down.
And then she just plays him like a fiddle, And not that she doesn't get in danger a lot of times doing it, because, the kind of men she's hanging out with, oh my goodness, you won't believe it. The kind of jams she gets in.
Right.
But somehow she always gets herself out and survives. And then it's like, okay. And then, this MI6 officer that's the director of everything, he's basically the James Bond at the time for UK. Literally, Ian Fleming would come to this man and say, okay, I'm thinking about writing about this. Could this really happen? And how would it happen? I mean, seriously, this guy was the best spy in the free world. And he would, he would be always trying to get her out of danger because he was falling in love with her and she had already fallen in love with him. And so, okay, yeah, now you're done. And then doggone if something wouldn't happen and he'd have to use her again. And so we're trading
Right.
on the go. And I wrote it in first person so that people will literally feel like they're on her back, from day one and just learning with her and dealing with what has to come, And
Really immersed in the
and it's very
experience.
short chapters and almost always a cliffhanger at the end. And I've had people say, I stayed home from work to finish this book, or I spent the whole night up reading this book, the editorial reviews have just been really, really, I'm very blessed. And I have to tell you, I don't have a background in education in writing. And I've read all my life. I pick an author and I just read everything they've written. But to think that I was going to write a book, well, no, that wasn't even ever in my plans. I mean, I was an opera singer, and I was, when I retired, I came to the upper Midwest and I started this great big conservatory of music, and I was a professor, of voice performance. But I had a lot of PTSD. And the last cause of that PTSD was I was living in New York at night and lost so many people. And then because of my career and because of my, my background, they called me and said, would you like to sing most of the Catholic memorials or funeral masses for the fallen service people? So these were state funerals.
Wow.
I did that for 6 months, sometimes twice a day. And so that was my last source of PTSD. But before that, Mission Thaw, all the things that I'm telling you about these refugees, I got involved. That was really bad. And then I was a volunteer in the Bosnian War, which, the next book is about that. And I'm going to be finishing that in August.
We're going to talk about your upcoming project.
I pick all these subjects, but it's really important. The International Labor Organization says that 21 million people are being human trafficked today, worldwide. So this idea did not go away, and is much more prevalent, and especially in war areas like Ukraine, for instance.
Right. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about, with all of your experience in having endured so many unfathomable circumstances, being in New York for 9/11, witnessing, the refugees, being in the Bosnian War as a volunteer. There are many catastrophic themes and happenings that are occurring throughout these different circumstances. Why was human trafficking and that political corruption the first thing that you wanted to focus on through Mission Thaw? And why was that the important thing for you to explore in that story?
Because I'm trying to get people to see what those people are experiencing at a very organic level. So I hold nothing back of what happened to particularly the women. Okay. And nothing is ever going to change. I just told you how many people are being victims today. Nothing is ever going to change if we all keep this, well, I'm safe and it's not my backyard, So I am, first of all, I am trying to build awareness. Second of all, I'm trying to get people to feel something about it as well. And from the readers that have gotten back to me, this book stays with them. Scenes in this book do not leave them. and actually had a few people say, I'm going to be more aware because, this is happening everywhere. I live in a town, a little college town in the upper Midwest, 17,000 people, okay? Quaint little college town. And about 2 months ago, our weekly paper, that's how small this town is, had front page news that 7 men had been arrested for trafficking and for prostitution of females underage. Okay, so I'm sorry, folks. It probably is in your backyard. Open your eyes, and if you see something that seems even vaguely suspect, report it. Whether it's your local police or, to an organization that is dealing with human trafficking. So that's the first thing, awareness, and then report. Number 2, maybe get involved. If it's nothing more than writing out a check to these organizations, okay? But make it a priority because it's probably one of the worst human travesties that we have right now.
Hey listeners, if you've been enjoying the show, I'd love it if you'd take a moment to leave a quick review. It helps more writers discover the podcast and lets us know what you'd like to see more of. Your words matter on the page and in the reviews. Thanks for supporting our community. Absolutely. Well, thank you for elaborating on that. How did you research all of the inner workings
The mission
of this book? The mission, the historical, political backdrop of the late Cold War Europe, the inner workings of CIA, MI6, KGB. Take us through that process.
Okay, first of all, you understand I'm an eyewitness to a lot of this, okay? And what I wasn't, I met so many spies over there. And, all of them were males, of course. But just interviewing them, the ones that are alive, a few were passed, but interviewing them about things that, weapons they use, Well, the weapons they use now are not the weapons they used then. And they were still, having to plant bugs because satellite was a brand new thing and it was real iffy, and especially in the mountains. So, you had to have a bug planted in a villa, like Herr Leitner's villa. Then, somewhere within a block, you had to have some, ice cream truck, that looked like an ice cream truck, but there was, a team in there listening, and recording.
Right.
You're looking at the late 80s. It's not today with all their, cyber stuff they have. I didn't know that much about Austrian politics, for instance. Why did they end up at this time, voting for someone that ran on that ticket? And just what prevalence how many people in the population of Austria were leaning towards Nazi politics, all that stuff. So it was a matter of doing a lot of regular research like writers do, but mostly interviews and a lot my memory. So now you have to remember I said I had PTSD, and so at some point that catches up with me, and I finally have to go into major therapy for that. One of the therapies was, maybe if you write it down, Kay. I was doing art therapy. I was doing music therapy, regular therapy. But, one of the therapists said, well, why don't you see if you can write it down? Because many times when you journal, you'll remember things that maybe are really, real deep down in your memory that you haven't thought about for a while. And it kind of is a release. And so I did. I was a very busy person. I was still singing, and I had this huge studio of, I was a professor. I was working 7 days a week, but every night I would sit down and do some journaling, and I did it in my computer. And then I would send this to my therapist. He was at a base down in Illinois, a naval base, and he said, I think you should try to write a book. This is most incredible.
Really? So he's the one that encouraged that initial idea.
I laughed at him and I went, oh, well, first of all, I have that time to do that. Second of all, I don't know if I want to dredge all that up, and I'd have to talk to a lot of people, and I'm not sure they do. And he said, well, just think about it. Well, then I did. And I had always thought that when I retired, which I don't think I'm ever going to, but, that I'm going to write children's books because I love children's books. And when I was my first degree, my parents said, you can't just get a vocal performance degree because if it doesn't work out, you have something to fall back on. So I was a double degree. I was also music ed. And all education, people have to take certain, different levels of child development, right? So I decided to take children's literature. Loved that course. And one of the projects was you had to write a little story. And so I did. And I was always making up stories too. My cousins and my nephew, their children, when I'd come home, I'd be like, well, I'd just kind of throw one out there. And so I just wrote one of those down. And the professor said, Kay, I know that you're music and all that, and you want to, go out there and perform and stuff, but you should try to write this book sometime. Because this is very, very, teaches kids about another culture, and it's funny, and it's, you love the little character, and so he said, think about this sometime. So that was in the back of my head, but no way did I ever think I would write a novel. Sometime in this past of mine, I lived with a very famous writer. Now, at that time, he wasn't famous. He was just getting going, okay? And I won't say who it is, but, he's the real deal. I mean, he went to Brown and, he always wanted to be a writer. And at first, he tried being a poet and, because, everybody did back then, in college. But then he got serious and, his books have been made into movies and everything. And so I did get a hold of him and I said, well, this is what's happened in my life. Hadn't spoke to him in decades. And they're encouraging me to write a book. How do you think I'd go about doing that? And he's like, okay, well, I guess you just, there's a lot of ways you could take classes, and I'm close to UW-Madison, which has a writing department and also gives adult classes. So I tried one of those. And so you submit a few pages every time you go. Well, the professor started reading mine a lot. And so I'm like, well, maybe that's okay, And then when the class is over, several weeks later, he goes, Kay, have you ever thought about co-authoring? Because this thing needs to get published. And I was like, no. And he was like, well, I might be interested because this book is really cool. And I'm like, well, let me think about that. So that really started to build my confidence. Okay. So.
Right. That validation.
And not knowing how most people do things. Now you have to understand, I'm totally out of the box here all along. I write a whole book. I just write the whole darn 90,000 word book from start to finish. And then.
Okay. How long did that take?
It took me about 6 months. Because by then I had to slow down my schedule because my mom moved in with me. She was diagnosed at first with Alzheimer's. Later we found it was Lewy body. And so I had been away from her for so long. And I said, I'm going to take care of my mom till the very end. And so now I'm at home a lot more. So that's how I think I was able to do it in 6 months compared to, what it might have taken. So I write this first book. Then I find a couple authors in Madison, and one of them says, yeah. I said, I want to hire you to read my book and tell me what you think now that it's finished. And so she did, and she was like, wow, what a story, but you don't know how to craft this book, And
right.
So we went through a second draft with her, and I think that was really devastating to me because it ended up that she would not follow my vision of the book. She kept trying to make it something else because she was not in my genre. That was a dumb mistake on my part, and it wasted a lot of time and money. So then my friend, for Christmas, gets me the James Patterson Masterclass series. Okay? And so I start watching this because, obviously he's in my genre, and he's very, very successful. And so I'm assigned a TA. And so I start working with that TA. Well, they're not going to do your whole book, but it gave me enough information that I was able to write the third draft just on that information. And the book changed a whole lot. And how it changed is I was trying to, make it so that it wouldn't gross anybody out or scare anybody and he was like, what really happened here when you watch those slides? I think there's more to it than this, right? And I'm like, oh yeah, but I mean, I don't even know if that's printable or whatever. And he's like, no, put it in. He goes, you've read James's books, he puts it all in. Okay. And he gets his stuff from FBI files. And so I'm like, okay. So at that fourth draft, then ba-da-ba-doom, I'm like changing all kinds of stuff, getting rid of all the fluffy stuff and getting right down to the bare bones. And then finally, a friend of mine comes back to this town, and he is a trained playwright, and he's written for movies, and he's exactly who I need to talk to. And he is such a dear friend. He's like, look, I don't need the money. I'm going to do this for you free. And we're going to get this thing ready to go. And he and I worked for 3 months, totally rewrote the book again. I'd write a section, I'd run over to his house, and he'd write his red, pen. I'd come back, and, he just kept saying more, and faster, faster, faster. And this is how you do action. Think it's a movie, Kay. You're an actor. You've been an actor all your life. Just think it's a movie. And so I did that, and, that's what I handed in.
Tell me about it. So at what point did you decide, firstly, to pursue the self-publishing route instead of a traditional publishing path? Or did you explore traditional publishing and then decide to go through the self-publishing path?
Well, yeah, I tried the traditional publishing thing for almost exactly 9 months. And my partner, he had some time on his hands. And so I taught him the process of submitting queries, etc., to agents. Okay. And he had a list, and he would literally send, 2 or 3 a day, because I said, I want them really stylized to what they have to say. I don't want it to send out a form letter. And so he would do 2 or 3 a day. Strangest thing about the ones we submitted, they would always write me back. I'd never not heard from anyone. And they'd always say, this is really well written, but it's not what I'm looking for, Or a couple times they were really excited, but then when they said to send chapters or whatever their requirements were, they would go, and then their agency said, opera singing spy? I don't think so. I heard that a lot. So then the next thing that happened was I got a hold of a guy that I said, well, maybe my query is not, I think it's good, but maybe not. And so he quoted that he could make a query that would absolutely sell. So I got to know him, changed my query, changed my synopsis a little. He also sent me to another woman that did editing of these 2 things, and we thought we had something really good. And so he said, Kay, I've gotten to know you now. You need to go to conferences, and and they have agents there, and sign up for agents, particularly in your genre, and pitch. I know you're going to get something if you pitch in person because you're so charismatic, blah, 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 blah. And so I start looking, and he said, hey, there's one by you in St. Paul, Minneapolis. Why don't you drive over and be in this one and, sign up for some of these agents and take the classes? Well, there were some classes I really wanted to hear. So I talked to a bunch of writers while we're waiting in between, in the lobby. And so I'm starting to feel pretty bad because a lot of them have degrees in writing. A couple of them are retired professors who taught writing. Now they're trying to get their own book out there, blah, blah, blah. And, and then there's my crazy story, right? Well, I just start writing when I was in my 50s, And so, but lo and behold, I get to that part, and I had been sitting in the hall, and people would go 6 at a time. And then people come out, no, I didn't get anything. No, I didn't get anything. I went in there, and I got 5 out of 6. handed me their card and said, send me whatever they wanted me to send. Okay. So I was like,
wow.
you hear about that elevator pitch thing? I had to pitch to one lady because she found out her flight to Denver was, she had to change it earlier. And so she told me, if you want to go out of the hotel with me. And so I'm literally like holding one of her suitcases, right? We're going up this big escalator and pitching the book. We go outside and it's
an escalator
pitch. And then I go outside. This is in St. Paul, and it's late winter, terrible weather. And, the taxis are going by, and nobody's listening. I'm an opera singer, So, and I know how to hail a cab. I lived in New York for 20 years. So, and I get her a cab, and then, I'm literally saying the last sentence when she's sitting down, and I close her door. I'm like, bye-bye, And so I really thought that one may work out because she just, she was like, you are something else. I got to read this book. Two of them asked for the whole book. A lot of them asked for quite a bit of the book. And they all liked it. All these women liked it because, I like to work with women if I can, because I'm a big feminist. And so, but then they go to their agencies and it gets shot down. Totally shot down. Either we don't like to do espionage. There's problems with that because the CIA, blah, 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 blah. People are scared of the CIA. Or, opera singing spy. Yeah, right. Yeah, that's going to sell, And so then I immediately get a call back from this organization. Oh, we're going to have one in San Francisco and it's going to have a whole lot more agents. So I'm looking at the price of that. Okay, now I'm a businesswoman. And I'm from the Midwest. Mm-hmm. I'm from Pioneer Stock. You got to be kidding. You think I'm going to spend that kind of money and have these kind of results? I'm much better because at that first conference, I took a bunch of classes on self-publishing, hybrid publishing, things that were not traditional. And so now I've got all my little, handouts and everything. And I'm like, something else that bothered me about those conferences. It seemed like the writers, like it was like a club, and they all knew each other and stuff, And I'm like, how many have they went to through the years, and how much money have they spent? And are they published? Heck no, right. And so I started studying about self-publishing, and I said, gosh, this is the way I do everything. I never do things traditionally. I didn't get in opera traditionally. Mm-hmm. I didn't, start a school traditionally. And I've been pretty darn successful. So maybe I just need to do it on my own. And I own a home. And so once I had it down to 3, and I decided on Tellwell for a couple reasons. Okay. I called the Better Business Bureau, and they had an A+.
Yeah.
And I personally thought it might be good to go with the Canadian company. Canadians are known for Americans to be pretty nice, trustful, honest people, By the time I had dealt with all those people, I was like, yeah, that might be good. And then it dawned on me, anything the CIA might not like about what I'm writing, and some of my spy friends said they might not, they're going to have a little harder time if my publisher's out of the country.
So it was strategic.
And so, at first I was thinking the UK because, I have a lot of friends there and stuff, and I even have spy friends there. But then, MI6, So let's go someplace that's near, that's trustworthy and has a good reputation. And then I of course went on Tellwell's site and saw all these different packages. And I decided I don't need to learn how to do all those different things. I'm going to get the big package and let them do it for me because I don't have time to learn how to design a cover of a book.
Right.
You know everything it takes. So I got the big package. And then I was like, well, that's quite a bit of money. Okay, so what am I going to do? So I thought to myself, do you believe in this story? Does this story need to get out? And I'm like, yeah. So I went to my bank. and I own a house, and I own a lot of equity in the house, and I just took out an equity loan. Most people do that to fix their house up or for kids' education or for a vacation. I did it to publish my book, and I never looked back. You have no idea. The two scariest things for me, besides the actual launch of the book where, okay, it's out there now, the two scariest things for me were thinking about what's this professional editor going to say about my book. I was terribly scared.
That's a big concern for a lot of
You
authors.
know,
Yeah.
still was not identifying myself as an author. And so therefore I was scared to death. And, and I remember I made my boyfriend stay home from work because I'm like, if she's really going to kill me, I want some kind of support there. So he sat, where she couldn't see him. It was the shock of my life. I have to tell you, she was like, wow, I have never had a book so put together. And I have to do very little. And then she just kept praising it and praising it and praising it, And in the end, she even said, hey, if you do a second book, I want to be the editor. Well, we really clicked. We're about the same age and stuff. We really clicked. And I just told her, I am on cloud 9, but I'm also in total shock, And so, maybe those 5 drafts in all those years, they paid off. Then I get to marketing and I meet Ben, and he and I just really, really clicked. And he says, well, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, this is going to happen, and you're going to have at least one editorial review. And I'm going, oh boy, here it comes, because I know,
Things are getting real.
Make our break, and so that, there's a bit of time, and then one day I get an email from him, hey, Kay, you got 5 stars, you got to read this, Again, I must have read it. I probably just sat there in a daze and read it like 3 times. Like, really? Did I read that? Okay, let me read that again, Then I started sending me like, hey, look what this, person said. And I have to say, since then, wow, I've gotten some really good ones. And reader reviews as well, So we get to the end of pretty much his contract. One day I'm realizing, I'm buying ads on Amazon and, but I'm like, okay, nobody knows about this book. What am I going to do? So I call up Ben and I'm like, Ben, is there anything else? I know we've exhausted what I paid for, but does Tellwell have any more really extensive PR? Stuff, publicity stuff. And he said, well, unfortunately not. And he did tell me about the Goodreads thing. And so I did the 100 ebook
the Goodreads
thing. Mm-hmm.
giveaways.
That was the last thing that, he could really get, set up for me. And so we did that. And, he was like, wow, I'd really like to get like 600 or 700, that'd be really great. Well, I think we ended up with 1488 or something like that. So that was,
he said it was like one of the best results that he's seen on a Goodreads review or a Goodreads giveaway.
And so those have been coming in slowly, because they're supposed to review it and stuff. And then I went ahead and did a couple other smaller, book reviewer sites that do review and had given me good reviews. I give 2 hardcover books away a month, those kind of things. But okay, so my assistant, I have a graduate student of mine that's in theater. She has been my assistant. She is my social media queen, okay, because I don't know about that either. She has put me on everything.
Everyone
and she
needs
is
one.
like putting stuff on that time. She makes ads. She does all this stuff. Now we're doing these really going to be. I'm reading a part of the book as a voiceover, and she's got all these pictures of what's going on, and I mean, she's just amazing. Authority magazine said, hey, we would put your thing on quicker if you did a 5 things about being a writer, video. She did that. I'm like, okay, got to learn about marketing now. What's my best bang for my buck? Because, I don't have a huge budget here. And so I saw this thing that came up in my email, Women's Publishing Conference. And so I was like, Okay, I think this is cool. And they had a lot of marketing classes, and it was virtual. So I didn't have to pay for a hotel and travel and all that. So Megan and I took a few days off work, and we just sat there and watched these things and took lots of notes. And of course, they were recorded since you paid for the thing. And so I watched a woman, and I said, that's the woman for me, about this marketing thing. And so after the conference, I made a consultation. Megan and I met with her and her team, and we decided, okay, let's do this. And, it was an investment, but I just went to one of my wealthy friends and explained it to them, and they said, you know what? Here's the money.
And this is clearly paid off because, I mean, we see publicity coming in from you all of the time. Ben is constantly sharing in our successes chats. Like it's really great to see.
And there's a lot more coming because the bigger ones, I mean, they might hold off 6 or 2 months before they release it because they really edit and all that. So there's going to be stuff coming in for the next year out of this 6 months. And I'm thinking about extending that now. But here's the thing now, we want to build a brand, and then they're gonna wallet Amazon with promotions. And, she's predicting, like, I'm gonna go from here to woohoo, because these promotionals. And I've okayed, she said, all right, so your ebook is $4. But she said time and time again, to get people really started, do a $2.99 promotional. And people just, with all the stuff they're going to set out on Amazon, because they're going to have these, movie ads and all that. So anytime you wrote Espionage, all of a sudden now I'll come up, And so that's coming up, and I'm excited, and I'm just keeping my fingers crossed. This whole thing could become a very, very expensive hobby, but I hope it works, and I'm willing to give it a try.
Yeah.
And
amazing.
Now I'm taking a lot of the month of August. I have the second book, about a third written, and I'm trying something new. A lot of the genre of movies that are like my books are starting like at the end and then going back, that kind of thing, and switchbacking. I'm trying that. That's pretty hard to do. This is the one about the Bosnian War, where Caitlin is going to try to go.
Right.
And this time she's a boss now, and her sidekick is actually an AWOL priest.
Okay, so I was going to ask if we were going to be seeing more of Caitlin in this upcoming project. So is this a continuation of the series?
Yeah, there's a trilogy. And
amazing.
So it expands her CIA career from 1987, I believe, and it will stop in 2002 after 9/11. So book 2 is called Mission Impromptu, which is she goes off and she goes rogue. She goes against orders to go save a bunch of orphans with this priest. And then the third one is she's back in New York. She's pretty much retired from the CIA, and she's singing locally for the Gracie Mansion and, all those places, and doing a little opera. And then she started a school with some other opera singers, and 9/11 happens. And so she's called right back in immediately. And so that's called Mission Homefront. So, yeah. And then we're done with Caitlin as far as her being an active spy.
A lot of exciting things in the works here, Kay.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, that's wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining me today for this conversation. I've really enjoyed it. I just have one last question. It is from our user submitted question series, The Plot Thickens. So for those listening, please be sure to follow us at Tellwell Publishing. I always go and I post on our Instagram stories asking for user submitted questions for the guests that we have on the podcast that week. So the question that came in, Kay, if Mission Thaw were made into a film or a series, who would you like to see cast as Caitlin and Clive?
So when I started this book in 2015, always thought of Scarlett Johansson. Okay. But now, I mean, there's been so many years going by. All my acting students are saying, oh no, we got to find someone else, So we're in the midst of trying to figure that out. We're in a big debate, but definitely because he's perfect age at this moment now, would be Aidan Turner for Clive Matthews. And if you watch PBS, he was Poldark, and he's also been in The Hobbit, and you can look him up. He looks almost like the real guy. Yeah. And, he can do action and also, Aidan Turner for sure. Caitlin's a little up in the air right now.
Well, thank you so much again for those listening. Please be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen, and you can catch the full episodes on YouTube. We'll see you in the next one. Bye. Thinking about self-publishing but not sure where to start? That's where Tellwell Publishing comes in. We offer assisted self-publishing services to help you bring your book to life your way. From editing and design to marketing and distribution, Tellwell's team works with you to create a book you'll be proud of while you keep creative control. From Lamar Jackson and Cindy Cherry to Kaya Usher and Rita Kakati Shah, Tellwell has helped thousands of authors publish their book with confidence. Visit tellwellpublishing.com to start your journey.